Hello, good to be back. Okay, so down to business. 5 rebuttals to the rebuttals that I gave to my 5 arguments in the previous video. Let's go. So, just to catch you up. First argument I gave was that university degrees are overinflated in terms of time and resources. Counter argument, the chain of reasoning goes, is that, well, university degrees are becoming inflated because society is simply becoming more complex. More time is necessary to educate students and bring them up to speed. Now, in response to this is a pretty common argument that I hear a lot of the time. But my thinking usually goes, well, I mean, first of all, this kind of philosophy is unsustainable. Because if you think about it, education is already, in the Western world at least, up to about, 17, 18 years, right? So you have the 12 years of dedicated schooling. You have about 3 or 4 years on average for an undergraduate degree. That takes up to 16, plus 2 years of masters, which most people do. Or if you're doing like a JD or further study like that. 18 years, right? 18 years. So from when you're about 6 to when you're about 24, 25. There's some part of me that just feels like time could be better spent. My personal education philosophy believes that real learning comes from experiences, right? And anyone who sat in a classroom with a teacher telling them their, A, B, and C or whatever will know that that doesn't work. Like, you can't teach people certain things. They have to experience them for themselves. They have to feel it. They have to sort of arrive at that situation and be like, okay, that makes sense. In a sense, wisdom, which is really what all education is aiming towards, from some way or another, wisdom cannot be taught. Wisdom must be learned from experience, right? And the teacher's job is not to dispense wisdom like some kind of, Pez dispenser, just pop, pop, but to sort of ask the right questions, put the students in the right situations, expose them to the right experiences so that they can begin to develop wisdom on their own. I can't help but think that spending 18 years in like one environment, basically, a school, is not the best way to be achieving that kind of growth, right? And I mean, that's just like a first cursory thinking, cursory idea. But secondly, in response to this, I simply think that it's just not true, right? Just because society becomes more complex does not necessarily mean that we need to keep students in school for longer and, have them go through longer and longer university degrees. Because hear me out. The way education should work and the way life works is that there is an immediate sphere of skills and ideas that someone needs to know to function within society. Like just basic like critical thinking, manners, how to interact socially, social cues, stuff like that. Basic history, basic maths, basic literacy, that kind of stuff. And once people have these basic skills, there's one basic skill that I forgot to mention, which is the most important skill, the ability to learn autonomously, learning how to learn, knowing how to learn. That's kind of core to everything. So knowing how to think, how to learn, how to socially interact with people, that's it. Once you have that, you have the minimum viable product, I suppose, is if you want to use business terms, right? You have someone who is capable of going out into the world and then developing organically, right? You don't have an approach where you're sort of just like, well, I'm going to keep you here for 18 years so you can learn absolutely everything that you need to know and then put you out into the world. That's just not an efficient way of going about it, if you think about it. Let's say, for example, I need to cook, right? I need to cook dinner. What do? Well, I mean, normally what people will do is they'll go online, they'll find a recipe. It may not be the best recipe. Their cooking skills may not be the greatest. Their knife skills might not be developed, but then they'll find something, it'll kind of work, they'll make the dish, and then as they make the dish again and again and again, they'll get better organically. They don't say, I need to cook something for tonight, then go online and extensively research and do a course in gastronomy and hone their knife skills and everything in preparation for cooking dinner at night, right? Does that analogy kind of work? I mean, I've been called out on using some very weird analogies, so I'm not entirely sure. I'm sure there's some, disanalogous elements that you can find, but the philosophy is generally the kind of same. You want to give students the bare minimum that they need and allow them to learn the rest on their own, right? You don't want to sort of coddle them all the way through. And besides, keeping someone in one location for 18 years stultifies the mind, right? It closes it for new experiences. So that's what I have to say on the first point. The second thing that I said was that universities have become too expensive, right? That was the second argument. And in response, the line of reasoning when that's a governmental issue, not a university issue, because government defunding and so on and so forth. Now, I acknowledge that on a very significant level, this higher education crisis that we're having in Australia is a government issue, right? The government does not put enough emphasis or enough significance on higher education, which is a huge mistake. It's sometimes you wonder what they're doing. But look, even though there's a very real governmental cause to this issue, it still doesn't get the university off the hook. Yeah, because there will still have been things that the universities could do to make the environment more friendly towards teachers and students. It's not simply a matter of, well, the government has decided not to prioritize higher education funding, therefore we shouldn't really care about the expense that we're passing on to our students, right? Something needs to be done. The buck has to stop somewhere. Just because the government is in the wrong doesn't mean that the universities get off the hook. And besides, if you look at the numbers, they just don't add up. If you take arts for an example, arts subjects mainly consist of sitting around and talking, right? How many fees could possibly be associated with sitting around and talking? Okay, they're printing costs, but students pay for the readers, right? They pay out the nose for the readers. They're like $80 each or something crazy like that. There's wages, but we know that the universities are shortchanging teaching staff on wages anyway. There's the building costs and utilities and stuff associated, but the universities own these buildings, right? Something doesn't add up. All right, so I don't really find that as a particularly compelling argument for why it's not the university's fault. Of course, to talk on a constructive note, true change within society has to occur on all levels, right? The governmental level, university level, individual level, right? Students and teachers as well. So I may talk more about the government aspect, although politics is not really my forte. This is kind of my area of focus for now. But like I said, true change occurs on all levels at once. Third argument. The third argument was that universities don't care about the quality of education. And the counter-argument was there are many hidden factors. This is a vast over-exaggeration, right? There may be a counterbalance between surviving as an institution and continuing to do the good that they can do versus prioritizing teachers and students in the short term. And I think the most interesting part of this counter-argument is this idea of graduate funding versus undergraduate funding. Because it's quite well known that at research institutions like the University of Melbourne, the undergraduate experience is sacrificed in a sense for graduate research, right? The reason why undergraduate degrees are so expensive and there are so many people pumped into them is, as the reasoning usually goes, so that the university can raise enough funds to fund graduate research. And now, graduate research does do a lot of good. Like, there's a lot of very, great findings that come out of graduate research. But I feel like there's an underlying moral issue, ethical issue here, with this almost quasi-exploitation of one group for the profit of another. Something doesn't quite sit right with me, because when you're trying to offer a service, your goal should be to offer the best possible service for your clients or your students or your customers. You shouldn't be thinking these students or these clients are simply my cash cows or where I'm getting the revenue to cater to my more important clients. I know that's how it works in the business world, but something about it, I just feel like education is above that, right? It should be something that is oriented towards the educational experience and not making a quick buck off. Okay, so for argument 5, the last one, I said universities are becoming obsolete, and the counter argument was, well, where else are young people supposed to go? What are they supposed to do with themselves if not go to university? Where can they get the same level of kind of social interaction and development with their peers and with their teachers? This is a really interesting question that I have a lot of very strong opinions on. Because, okay, there's no real alternatives to university at the moment. But, like I said last time, this is more because of a lack of imagination, a lack of competition, rather than serving as an actual solid reason for why universities will stay and should stay. So in my mind, there are two things that are sort of like the prime functions of the university at the moment. And I've talked about this in previous videos. But the first thing is employment possibilities, right? Universities place themselves as the best way to get a job, or at least a high-paying career. And the second thing is this sort of idealistic, find yourself, spend some time learning for the sake of learning. The problem is, Those two goals don't really go together. They're antithetical, actually. And the universities are trying to do both at the same time, which is why we get all this dissonance, right? All these things that don't quite line up. Because, for instance, if we're truly pursuing an education for its own sake, why are we ruthlessly grading people on a curve and giving them whams that they have to protect? And basically forcing them into situations where they can't make mistakes, because that will jeopardize their future career internship possibilities. As everyone knows, you learn from your mistakes, right? Making mistakes is one of the best ways to learn. So that doesn't make sense. There's a conflict. And there are many, many more of these, little conflicts that exist because the university is trying to cater to two different markets and mush them into one service. So I think the most logical solution to this in the future is that instead of going to university, there will be two different industries, so to speak, that split up what the universities are currently trying to mush into one. One of those industries will be simply about employment skills. Maybe there's like a coding boot camp that will teach you how to rudimentarily code in 6 months, or something that teaches you digital marketing in 3 months, or maybe like a leadership/management course that runs for 3 months and sort of like gives you intensive hands-on workshopping, giving you the skills that you need to lead and manage a team. And then of course your education, your dedicated education finishes there, and then you have enough skills to sort of go into the workplace, right? But then once you're in the workplace, your education never really stops, right? You start learning on the job, and everything that you learn on the job is applicable to your immediate life because you're literally using it as soon as you learn it. And that's sort of the first function taken care of. And I envisage that this first group will be taken over by big companies, which is something that I'm a little bit concerned about. But it's already kind of happening. You see places like Apple and Microsoft and Google, and they're setting up their own academies and their own universities. And the technical information they give at those universities is far ahead of what we get at conventional universities. But secondly, there will be another sort of industry, and that industry will be purely dedicated towards this kind of this ideal of learning for its own sake, creating an environment where students can really engage with ideas and with concepts and with knowledge in a way that is not going to be anxiety inducing, in a way that's not persecuting them for making mistakes. Essentially the way universities should have been before they kind of had this identity crisis. And this second group is what I am, if you can't tell, primarily interested in. The group that prioritizes education for education's own sake. And in this kind of group, there will be a lot of radical changes. We won't be using grades, right? There won't be any standardized testing, because education is an intensely personal, transformative experience. How the heck are you supposed to measure that on a standardized curve? The very concept of it, the fact that it exists currently in our standardized testing system, is just antithetical to this whole philosophy. And there would be other things that are native characteristics of this system, right? This system should be something that actually incentivizes curiosity and the making of mistakes. Something that incentivizes having new experiences, that encourages people to dip their toes outside of their fields of study. I mean, universities try to do that with breadths, but they never really accomplish it. Because really, at the moment, what you're doing in university is going into a breadth subject is just dipping into another stream temporarily before you return back to your home, your native pond. There is no interaction between the two. But a true interdisciplinary approach will break down these kind of barriers altogether, right? These will be institutions where it's just like, okay, everyone who is here just for the sake of these ideas and this knowledge and this enrichment and this social interaction, which I believe is an essential human need. There won't be any other incentives. There won't be a desire to, for instance, get a degree. This is not a utilitarian sort of half step. This is, as Aristotle will call it, an end in itself. You are here because you want to be here. You're not here because you want to be somewhere else, but you have to go through this to get there. And when we are able to sort of isolate this part of education, this holistic, idealistic part, from all of the practical stuff that is now being catered for by, an entirely different industry, that's going to be better for everyone involved. And, of course, universities will probably still exist, but as, like I said, dedicated academic, scholarly research institutions. But anyway, that's enough stuff said for that fifth point. Those are my rebuttals to the rebuttals. Of course, there are further rebuttals that can be made on my rebuttals to the rebuttals, but you can't anticipate them all, right? I suppose the takeaway here right? The takeaway, like all of this is fun and whatnot, like arguing with myself and going through this line of reasoning. This is why I studied philosophy. It's fun to me. But the takeaway, the principle at the end of the day is this: only time will tell who is right, whether universities are just breaking into their stride or if they are on their last legs. So time will tell. You know, there's multiple interpretations. All of this is kind of subjective. We can give our best line of reasoning for it, but at the end of the day, there are some factors that are outside of our control that we can't predict. Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Stay safe, and until I see you next time, bye-bye.